Bobby Watson sat with his back pressed against the engine room bulkhead of the landing craft mechanized, feeling the warmth through his soaking wet uniform. The warmest seat in the boat. That's what he'd told himself when he took it. Now, 300 yards from Omaha Beach, it felt like the last warm thing he'd ever experience. He was 18 years old, and he'd been throwing up for the past 20 minutes. Seasick. The 4-foot swells had been hammering the LCM since they'd left the transport ship, and saltwater kept splashing over the sides faster than the bilge pumps could handle it. Around him, Army engineers with big red 1 patches on their shoulders were bailing water with their helmets. Ankle deep and rising, the plastic-wrapped Springfield rifle strapped to Watson's back felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Add the 60 pounds of actual equipment, and he could barely move. Through the chaos of men shouting and water sloshing and the engine roaring, he could see the church steeple at Colville rising above the beach ahead. That meant they were on target. At least something was going right. But nothing else was. German artillery shells were exploding on the beach, throwing up columns of sand and smoke. Landing craft all around them were blowing up, just disappearing in flashes of light and spray. Watson had watched one LCVP cruising along 3 inches above the water. The next second, it was gone. Just gone. The men inside it, gone. He'd thrown up again after seeing that. The coxswain was terrified. Watson could see it in the way he hunched over the controls, in the way he kept slowing down, even though they needed to get to the beach. Army officers were screaming at him from the front of the craft, "Get to the beach. Get this thing going." The coxswain would give it more throttle for a few seconds, then slow down again. Watson didn't blame him. Every instinct in your body told you to stop, to turn around, to go anywhere but forward into that hell. He thought about the general's speech back in England, the one where the general had stood on top of a tank and promised them everything would be easy. The Air Force would bomb the beach at 0300 so severely they wouldn't even need their shovels. Bomb craters everywhere. The Navy guns would open up at 0430 and pulverize the German defenses. A dozen landing craft with rockets would run right onto the beach and destroy the shore batteries. 100 tanks would lead the way. The biggest bombardment parade in history. Watson couldn't see any bomb craters, couldn't see any of the 100 tanks, couldn't see the control boat that was supposed to be out here guiding them in. The only thing he could see was smoke and fire and landing craft exploding and that church steeple getting closer. The Army officers screamed at the coxswain again. The coxswain finally gave it full power. The LCM surged forward through the swells, 250 yards from shore. 200. The mine detonated directly under the front of the craft. The explosion lifted Watson off his seat and threw him backward through the air. His left leg caught the bulwark as he flew over it, tearing open the skin. Then he hit the water. The cold drove the air from his lungs. 60 pounds of equipment dragged him straight down into the darkness. His hands found the 2 switches inside his life belt and squeezed. The CO2 bottles activated. The belt inflated. He shot back up to the surface, gasping, choking on salt water. Men were bobbing in the water around him. He couldn't tell who was alive and who was dead. The ones in the front of the craft had died instantly from the blast. The salt water stung his torn leg. He was in shock. He knew he was in shock because everything felt distant and unreal, like he was watching it happen to someone else. But the terror was immediate and sharp. He was scared to death. Other landing craft were passing him. He knew they wouldn't stop. Couldn't stop. He'd been told that back on the ship. "If you fall off, we will not stop the war." Watson thought he was the last man in hell, 18 years old, drowning 300 yards from the beach, watching his war end before it started. Then he saw a landing craft vehicle personnel headed straight for him. He screamed at the coxswain, "Hey, stop! Hey, I'm over here." His voice was raw. The coxswain either heard him or saw him because the LCVP slowed just enough. A rope was hanging from the side of the craft, dragging in the water. Watson grabbed it with both hands and held on. The LCVP kept moving. Watson clung to the side with one hand, his fingers wrapped around that rope, like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. Salt water splashed his face constantly. He gagged on it, coughed it up, gagged again. The rope was tearing the skin off his palms, but he couldn't let go. The craft dragged him through the water toward the beach. Every wave hit him in the face. Every second felt like it might be the one where his grip failed, and he slipped back into the water and drowned. About 40 yards from shore, in shallow enough water that he could stand, Watson let go. His hands were bleeding. The skin had been scraped completely off his palms. He stumbled forward through the surf and found a nightmare waiting for him. German artillery shells exploded on the sand. Machine gun fire stitched across the beach in long bursts that sounded like ripping cloth. Sherman tanks were burning on the waterline, thick black smoke pouring from them. Half-sunk landing craft bobbed in the bloody surf. Bodies and pieces of bodies littered the sand. Wounded men were screaming for help. The noise was overwhelming. Artillery and machine guns and screaming and the sound of metal tearing and wood splintering. It was horrible. Everyone was screaming for help. Everyone was wounded. Watson crawled on his hands and knees up the beach. His uniform hung in tatters, but his helmet was still strapped to his head. He kept repeating the same words over and over. "Bob, get your head together. I don't want to die here. I don't want to die here." Once he was out of the water, he pulled his Springfield rifle from its protective plastic bag. The rifle was wet, but intact. Watson crawled up to an army medic who'd lost everything except the strings of morphine syrettes hanging around his neck. The medic gave Watson one syrette, shouting over the din of battle to be heard. Just give it to a medic. Watson reached into his first aid kit and pulled out sulfa powder and pressure bandages, handing them over. The medic nodded and moved on. Watson climbed farther up the beach, crawling over dead and wounded Americans, removing first aid kits from the bodies of men who wouldn't need them anymore. He threw the kits back down the beach toward the medic, the dead helping save the living. That's what it came down to. Watson had arrived an hour into the battle. Companies E and F from Colonel George Taylor's 16th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division had landed on Fox Green and Easy Red beaches, right across from the Cullowville Draw. They'd run into a slaughter. The Germans had defensive positions on either side of the draw. Wider stands, Nest 61 on Watson's left, low to the beach, firing an 88mm cannon from a concrete bunker. Wider stands, Nest 62 on his right, up on a hill, dominating the entire area with a 75mm cannon. Some of the heavy guns had been knocked out before Watson arrived, but artillery and mortars and machine guns and sniper fire kept raining onto the beach. Many soldiers had been killed as they charged out of their landing craft. Some never made it out at all. The ones who survived struggled up the beach, exhausted, weighted down by equipment and soaking wet uniforms. Many more were cut down before they reached cover. Almost all the officers in F Company were either killed or wounded in the first minutes. Watson continued crawling up the beach until he met an army captain. The captain ordered him to the firing line immediately. Watson pointed at his helmet. It had the distinctive navy-orange crescent on the front with a black number 6 and a gray band around the base. Beachmaster. He was Navy, not de novo infantry. The captain was unimpressed. He pulled his pistol and pointed it at Watson's head. "Get your ass up there, or I'll blow your head off." Watson got his ass up there. "Before we find out what happened next, I need to tell you why this channel exists. Every single day, I bring you World War II stories that go beyond the tactics and the strategy and the dry military analysis. These are stories about human beings thrown into impossible situations and forced to make choices they never imagined making." Bobby Watson was 18 years old. He'd joined the Navy 6 months earlier because he wanted 3 hot meals a day and a bed to sleep in. That's it. That's all he wanted. Instead, he got blown up by a mine, dragged through freezing water with the skin tearing off his hands, and crawled onto the most lethal beach in history while an army captain pointed a gun at his head. If you want to understand not just what happened in World War II, but what it felt like to the people who lived through it, hit that subscribe button. because Watson's next 28 days on Omaha Beach will show you what it cost to survive. And quick question, where are you listening to this right now? Watson crawled onto that beach 80 years ago thinking he was the last man in hell, and now his story reaches you wherever you are. He was 18. He'd watched Casablanca as his last movie before shipping out. He wanted 3 hot meals. He got blown up, dragged through water, forced to fight with a gun pointed at his head. Drop your city in the comments, because what he survived connects all of us across time and distance. Now, back to Watson and that firing line. Watson joined the other soldiers lying on the sand, firing at Germans 300 yards to his right. He could see them running behind Widerstand's Nest 62 to a reinforced hut, grabbing supplies, running back. He loaded his wet ammunition clips into his Springfield rifle. His hands were shaking, not just from the cold or the torn skin or the shock, from fear that the ammunition wouldn't work. Wet ammunition could jam, could misfire, could blow up in your face. He squeezed off his first shot. The rifle worked fine. He fired again and again. He went through about 10 clips, firing at Germans he could barely see through the smoke and chaos. Later, someone would ask him if he killed anyone. He'd tell them the truth. I don't know if I killed anyone or not. I didn't really care. That was the reality of combat. You fired because not firing meant dying. Whether the bullets hit someone or just kept their heads down didn't matter in the moment. What mattered was survival. After helping reduce the fire coming from Widerstand's Nest 62, Watson decided to head back down toward the beach and do his actual job. He was a beachmaster. His orders were to get to the beach line and move to the beach station where his unit would be setting up operations. While he searched for his unit, he came across Lieutenant Junior Grade James F. Collins, the medical officer. Collins took one look at Watson's lacerated left leg and said one word, later. Then he moved on to someone who needed immediate attention. Watson found Company B sailors gathered just below Widerstand's Nest 62. He counted them, 36 men. That's all that was left. Out of the entire company, only 36 had made it. A lot of our boys didn't show up, Watson thought. One of the missing was Lieutenant Wade, the beachmaster who'd commanded B6 platoon. Wade had been one of the nicest guys you wanted to meet. A 90-day wonder who'd graduated from the accelerated officer course, but a good officer, fair, competent, the kind of leader who made you want to do your job well. Wade never made it to the beach. Somewhere between the transport ship and the shore, he'd been killed. Watson would never know exactly how. There were too many ways to die on that approach. Your landing craft could hit a mine. German artillery could score a direct hit. Machine gun fire could catch you as the ramp dropped. You could drown in the surf. Wade had died one of those ways, and now he was gone. Watson did find Dick Wyatt, who'd been on the same LCM before the mine sank it. Neither of them knew how the other had survived. They didn't ask, just nodded at each other and got to work. That's what you did. You kept working, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant breaking down. The survivors of Company B started setting up beach operations under continued German fire. They put up large red banners and flags to signal incoming ships that they were approaching easy. Red Beach. Every quarter of a mile along both Fox Green and Easy Red, the beachmasters established sandbagged communication stations. Watson noted that the Germans had made great sandbags, well constructed, better than the American ones. The beachmasters set up colored signal lights to designate the beach at night and regular signal lights to communicate with ships in the channel during the day. When the Army called and said they needed ambulances, the beachmasters would get on the lights and signal the ships. They became so proficient they joked about it. "We were Amazon," Watson would say later. "Anything you needed, you could pick up the phone and we'd get it." They joked they could order an ice cream sandwich with their lights and flags if they wanted to. When ambulances drove off their landing craft, beachmasters would drive a jeep in front of them and lead the convoy up the draw to 1st Infantry Division headquarters. As the fighting moved inland, wounded Americans and prisoners of war were brought down to the beach. Watson was surprised to discover that many of the Germans weren't actually German. They were foreign conscripts, Russians, Poles, men who'd been pressed into service and given German uniforms. Despite enemy artillery still exploding on the beach throughout the day, the Americans set up a POW holding pen at the base of the draw. It's a parking lot today. Back then it was wide open and completely exposed. Both POWs and wounded needed to be evacuated off the beach since there was no room for additional landing craft to bring in supplies and reinforcements. Watson was working with Wyatt when a bosun's mate ordered them both down to the beach. They found Ensign James Allison, the assistant beachmaster, waving a red flag at the ships in the channel. The signal meant stay away. German artillery was pounding the beach, and it was too dangerous for ships to approach. With Lieutenant Wade dead, Allison was now in charge of their platoon. He was the other 90-day wonder, the other nice guy. Allison asked Watson a question. "Do you know how to drive a bulldozer?" Watson had never driven a bulldozer in his life. He told Allison that he could. Allison pointed to an abandoned bulldozer up the beach and told Watson and Wyatt to bring it back to him so they could start clearing obstacles and pushing stranded landing craft back into the water. As Watson and Wyatt headed toward the bulldozer, an artillery round exploded near them. An Army corporal was hit, almost cut in half. They got him to a medic and kept moving. The bulldozer was still running when they reached it. Watson looked at the controls and tried to figure out how they worked. He was still studying them when Wyatt tapped him on the back and pointed toward the water. Ensign Allison was floating face down in the surf. They ran to him and lifted him out of the water. Shrapnel had hit him in the back of the head. They dragged him up the beach to Dr. Collier, who took one look and shook his head. There was nothing anyone could do. James Allison, one of the nicest guys you wanted to meet, was dead. Both of B6 platoon's officers were now gone. Wade killed before reaching the beach. Allison killed by shrapnel while directing ships. The two good men who'd trained Watson and Wyatt and the rest of the platoon were dead within hours of landing. Watson and Wyatt spent the rest of D-Day on that bulldozer. When German artillery destroyed it, they found another one. Once the tide went out, empty landing craft became stranded on the sand. The two beachmasters pushed them back into the water, but only if the coxswains followed their rules. When one coxswain ordered them to push him back to the water, Watson refused. "No way. You get loaded with wounded, then we'll push you back." The coxswain complied. They used their small amount of power to save lives however they could. Later that afternoon, a Navy lieutenant, in charge of one of the other companies, asked Watson his rank. "Seaman first class," Watson told him. The lieutenant looked at him for a moment. "Now you're a coxswain. Field promotion on a battlefield." That night, exhausted beyond anything they'd ever experienced, Watson and Wyatt found a German dugout to the left of the top of Widerstand's Nest 62, near where the 5th U.S. Engineer Special Brigade Monument stands today. They climbed into the enemy position and slept well, despite the noise of battle still raging around them. Coxswain Bob Watson had survived D-Day. The next morning, Watson and Wyatt continued their work pushing craft into the channel. An officer found them and gave them a new assignment. Use the bulldozer to plow straight into the water and clear the obstacles as the tide fell. Engineers would clear the mines first to make it safe. The plan was to create paths marked by buoys to guide incoming landing craft. Once the demolition crews removed the mines, Watson and Wyatt went to work breaking up the obstacles with their bulldozer. They created a driveway for the landing craft. They also helped clear wrecked craft along the beach. Everyone on the beach had to stay in full battle gear until D+7. One afternoon, a dirt cloud stirred up on the western side of the beach. As it floated toward the Colville draw, someone hollered the words that made every soldier's blood run cold. Gas, gas, gas. Men scrambled to find their gas masks. Many had discarded them shortly after landing because they were heavy and seemed unnecessary. Watson had kept his strapped to the side of his bulldozer. He quickly donned it as the cloud approached. It turned out to be a false alarm, but the terror had been real. When the bulldozer ran low on gas, Watson drove it up a hill to a refueling station. Army engineers had laid a metal mat to keep vehicles from getting stuck in the sand. A military policeman guarding the station yelled at him, "Keep that damn thing off my road." Watson tried to maneuver the bulldozer to the side of the mat. Boom. The bulldozer's tracks detonated a German S-mine, the Bouncing Betty. When triggered, it launches 3 feet into the air before exploding, designed to catch soldiers in the chest and head. The blast hurled Watson off his seat and down the hill. Shrapnel lacerated his right leg. Wyatt was also injured. Doctors and medics from a nearby aid station rushed over and helped them inside. Once Watson's wounds were treated, he spent the night there recovering. I need to pause here because this is the part of Watson's story that won't let me go. He joined the Navy for 3 hot meals and a bed. 6 months later, he's firing wet ammunition at Germans he can barely see, not knowing if he's killing anyone, not caring, because caring means dying. He finds his unit, and only 36 men are left out of the entire company. Lieutenant Wade, one of the nicest guys you wanted to meet, never made it to the beach. Ensign Allison, the other nice guy, died in the surf a few hours later. That's the math of Omaha Beach. That's what it cost. 2/3 of the company gone. The officers dead. And Watson just keeps working. Lies about knowing how to drive a bulldozer and drives it anyway. Gets blown up by a mine-clearing obstacles and goes to the aid station like it's a minor inconvenience. If you were Watson, at 18 years old, having lost both your officers and most of your friends, getting wounded twice in 2 days, how do you keep going? How do you not break down completely? Drop your answer in the comments because I genuinely want to know what you think kept these men moving forward when everything was falling apart around them. Here's what Watson did next. The next morning, Watson woke up at the aid station, feeling much better. He was brewing some hot chocolate outside when the Navy lieutenant who'd promoted him to coxswain walked up. The lieutenant asked the attending physician if he could have Watson. The doctor said Watson was only available for a limited duty. The lieutenant told Watson to hop in his jeep. They drove down the draw to the POW holding pen at the base. There were jillions of them, Watson recalled later. Germans and foreign conscripts all crowded together, all waiting to be evacuated. Watson's new job was to escort prisoners from the pen to the beach and load them onto any available ship or craft. He and an Army corporal would line up 300 prisoners at a time, 4 abreast, and lead them in a jeep mounting a .30 caliber machine gun. The prisoners marched with their hands on their heads. As Watson shepherded them to the beach, they'd ask questions. "Are you going to put us on a boat and take us to New York City? You got any cigarettes?" When German artillery shelled the beach, Watson used a unique early warning system. German 88mm shells whistle when they come down. The German prisoners could hear that whistle before Watson could. If they got down, he got down with them. Whenever enemy salvos came in, Watson would holler for more guards. He was worried about the prisoners, who might have a chance to escape in the chaos. For about a week, Watson and the corporal marched POWs to the beach, mostly loading them onto LSTs. The landing ship tank was ideal for the job. The center of the ship was just one huge open space surrounded by a catwalk. One soldier with a machine gun on the catwalk could guard hundreds of prisoners below. While the German prisoners were mostly docile, American LST officers sometimes weren't. One day, Watson spotted an empty LST and marched his prisoners to the ramp officer, an ensign. He told the ensign these prisoners were his now. The ensign looked uncomfortable at the prospect of a shipload of enemy soldiers. He picked up the ship's phone and started yelling, "Give me the bridge! Give me the bridge!" It was no use. Watson marched the prisoners into the hold. The ramp went up. The doors closed. The captain waited for high tide to float his ship off the beach. The ensign would just have to deal with it. Once Watson's legs healed enough for him to walk without limping, he took on a new job, carrying wounded soldiers on stretchers from the aid stations to the beach for evacuation. "My arms are at least half an inch longer from all that stretcher carrying," he'd joke later. He and Wyatt improved their sleeping trench by adding mattresses they'd taken from a damaged landing craft infantry. "We had all the comforts of home," Watson said. They built a cover to keep out the rain. People were jealous of Dick and him. When German aircraft strafed the beach, the 2 sailors were safe in their covered trench. During one raid, the LSTs offshore fired their 20mm anti-aircraft weapons wildly into the air. "What goes up must come down," Watson noted. Anti-aircraft shells rained back down onto the beach. Commander Carusi, the commanding officer of the 6th Naval Beach Battalion, was hit at the other end of Watson's trench. Even though Carusi was only 40 feet away, Watson never saw him get hit. The medics were on him immediately. All Watson knew was that a man had been wounded. Carusi was put in a jeep and driven to an airstrip above the beach. A C-47 transport flew him to England for treatment. Even the commanders weren't safe from friendly fire. 10 days after D-Day, a brutal storm hit Normandy. It beached ships and destroyed the American-built Mulberry Pier. The storm tore it to hell, Watson remembered. He and Wyatt rode out the storm in their covered trench while waves crashed onto the beach and wind tore at everything that wasn't secured. After the storm passed, engineers tried to rebuild the pier, but it ended up much shorter than before. Landing craft had to come in closer to deposit their cargoes. Watson and his fellow beachmasters lived off K rations and C rations, candy bars, and any other food they could pilfer from the arriving ships. Nothing went across that beach without us eating it first, Watson said. We needed to test everything to make sure the boys up front got the very best. He was also able to replace his torn-up uniform with new clothes scavenged from supply shipments. Although numerous Army generals and Navy admirals visited Omaha Beach throughout June to inspect the operations, Watson never saw any of them. "The only officers I saw were 90-day wonders," he said. Watson and Wyatt once drove a jeep into the city of Bayeux looking for a beer garden. All they found were grateful French locals. They were awfully pleased to see us, Watson recalled. After driving around for about 20 minutes without finding anything resembling a bar, Watson told Wyatt they should get the hell out of there and get back to the beach. The beach had become home. It was familiar. They knew how to survive there. Watson received his third wound when a piece of shrapnel tore through his left foot. He made his way to a hospital tent where he took off his boot for the attending nurse. It was filled with blood. She quickly stitched the wound and told him it wasn't serious enough to admit him to the hospital, but he should make sure the medics documented it so he could receive a Purple Heart medal. After she gave him a new pair of socks, she offered to keep him there for a few days to rest. Watson replied that he wanted to get back to his unit. He reported the wound to the medics as instructed, but it worried him. He thought that once the Navy documented that he'd been wounded, they'd contact his mother back in Massachusetts and tell her Bobby had been wounded. He didn't want her to worry. Finally, after 28 days of fighting and taking shrapnel and bulldozing obstacles and escorting prisoners and carrying wounded on stretchers, Watson and what remained of his platoon were relieved of duty. Or, as Watson remembered it, they told us, "We don't need you here anymore." On July 3rd, he and the 5 other survivors of his platoon boarded a ship for the journey back to England. German prisoners were aboard, too, heading to POW camps in Britain. The Beachmasters took up residence in a London hotel across the street from a pub. Even though they weren't heavy drinkers and had no money, they went across the street to celebrate. Nobody was firing at us anymore, Watson explained. That was reason enough. The locals offered them a brew called Toby's Ale. One pint followed another as both the Americans and the British celebrated together. "We drank all the Toby's Ale left in England," Watson said. The next morning, Watson woke up with a pounding headache and a throbbing right arm. He understood the headache. That was the Toby's Ale. But his arm shouldn't hurt. He rolled up his sleeve and discovered a tattoo of an anchor with a ribbon initialed USN. He was shocked. "Where the hell did I get this damn tattoo?" he thought, because I didn't have any money. He soon learned that his fellow beachmasters all had the same tattoo. They'd apparently found a tattoo parlor somewhere near the hotel during their drunken celebration. Decades later, Watson would return to London to see if the hotel was still there. It was, but there wasn't any tattoo parlor anywhere near that place. The mystery of where they got those tattoos would never be solved. But Watson would carry that anchor on his right arm for the rest of his life. A permanent mark of survival that he didn't remember getting. If you've made it this far with Bobby Watson's story, thank you for taking this journey through his 28 days on Omaha Beach. This channel isn't about glorifying war or celebrating tactics. It's about honoring the people who lived through these events by telling the truth about what they experienced and what it cost them. Watson was a kid who wanted 3 hot meals and a bed. He got blown up 3 times. He lost both his officers within hours of landing. He watched 2/3 of his company disappear. He lied about knowing how to drive a bulldozer and drove it anyway. He marched German POWs to ships while their artillery was still shelling the beach. He carried stretchers until his arms stretched, and he kept working because that's what you did. You kept working because stopping meant breaking down. I bring you these stories every single day because they deserve to be told with their full human truth. Hit that subscribe button for daily stories that honor what these ordinary people survived. But Watson's story isn't quite finished because what happened after he left the beach is part of who he became. So here's what haunts me about Watson's story. He got drunk in London celebrating that nobody was shooting at him anymore. He woke up with a tattoo he didn't remember getting. That anchor on his arm marked him as a survivor for the rest of his life. 68 years later, married to a woman he met at a dance, father to 3 sons who exist because he survived, he looks back and says, "I did my best." But only 36 men from his entire company came off that beach alive. Lieutenant Wade and Ensign Allison, the nicest guys you wanted to meet, were dead. Was surviving enough? Is "I did my best" what you say when you're one of the lucky ones who made it home? There's no easy answer to this. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Not what you think you're supposed to say, but what you actually believe about survivor's guilt and doing your best when most of your friends didn't make it. Now here's how Bobby Watson came home. With his Navy anchor permanently tattooed on his right arm, Watson boarded a ship bound for New York City. He arrived in September at the same pier from which he'd departed 9 months earlier. Pier 92. He took a train to Lynn, Massachusetts, walked to the movie theater where he'd worked as head usher before the war, and presented himself to his old manager, Mr. Collins. Collins looked at him in shock. "Where in the hell did you come from?" When Watson told him he needed a ride home, Collins helped him pack his sea bag, mattress, and equipment into his car. They drove to Watson's house. It was empty. His mother had become a welding inspector at the Boston shipyard as part of the war effort. His father worked in the shoe business. They were both at work. Collins made a quick phone call to Watson's mother, and she came home early. When she walked through the door and saw her son standing in the living room in his Navy uniform, she embraced him. "Good God," she said, "it's really you." His father came home a little later. The family was whole again. But there was still a war on. Watson received orders to report to the Beach Battalion School at Oceanside, California. Since the Navy had no need for more beachmasters after the successful Normandy landings, he was given a new job escorting Navy truck convoys with a Jeep. They must have heard about his work on Omaha Beach. To make extra money, he filled in as a soda jerk at the post exchange and drove a taxi on weekends. One day, while he was working the counter at the PX, someone came in with news. An American bomber had dropped an atomic bomb on Japan. Watson's first thought was immediate and heartfelt. God bless Harry Truman. He'd been scheduled to participate in the invasion of Japan if the war continued. That invasion would have made Omaha Beach look easy. The atomic bomb meant he wouldn't have to go through that hell. While his day work was routine, the nights were different. Watson and his fellow sailors attended dances whenever they could. One night, they rushed to a dance hall to get there before a group of Marines. Watson grabbed the hand of a girl on the dance floor and spun her around. Her name was Marjorie Ewing. That encounter changed his life. "I spun her one time," Watson would say decades later, and 68 years later, she was still spinning. The couple married exactly 1 year and 1 day after D-Day, June 7th, 1945. They eventually had 3 sons, Mark, Bob Jr., and Mike. 3 boys who got to exist because their father had survived those 28 days on Omaha Beach. 3 boys who grew up hearing some stories about the war and never hearing others. Some things you talk about, some things you keep locked away. Reflecting on his war experiences many years later, Watson was characteristically straightforward. You go through that one time and that's enough. I don't want to do that again. Yet, he found positives from the experience. I grew up there, he said. Omaha Beach had turned an 18-year-old kid who wanted 3 hot meals into a man who could handle anything life threw at him. When asked if he would have done anything different during his 28 days on Omaha Beach, Watson gave the only answer that mattered. I did my best. That's what they all did. Bobby Watson and Dick Wyatt and the 34 other survivors of Company B Lieutenant Wade who never made it to the beach. Ensign Allison, who died in the surf. All the boys who didn't show up when they gathered below Widerstand's Nest 62. All the wounded Watson carried on stretchers. All the German prisoners he marched to the ships. All of them did their best in circumstances that would break most people. Watson didn't ask to be on Omaha Beach. He'd joined the Navy for 3 hot meals and a bed. He'd watched Casablanca as his last movie before shipping out, probably thinking about Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman and romance in wartime. Instead, he got a mine explosion that threw him into freezing water, a rope that tore the skin off his hands while dragging him to shore, an army captain pointing a gun at his head, wet ammunition that might not fire, officers dead within hours, a company reduced to 36 survivors, bulldozers and bouncing Bettys, and German artillery and stretchers that made his arms stretch. 28 days of hell that he survived by lying when necessary, working when exhausted, and refusing to quit when quitting would have been understandable. 28 days that ended with a drunken celebration in a London pub and a tattoo he didn't remember getting. An anchor with USN on his right arm, a permanent mark of the Navy he'd joined for 3 meals, a permanent reminder that he'd been the last man in hell and had somehow crawled out alive. He came home to Lynn, Massachusetts, married Marjorie Ewing after spinning her around once, had 3 sons, built a life, carried that anchor tattoo for 68 years of marriage. And when someone asked him about it all, about those 28 days that changed everything, he gave them the simplest and most profound answer possible. I did my best. That's all any of them could do. That's all any of us can do when we're thrown into situations we never asked for and have to find a way through. Lieutenant Wade did his best and died before reaching the beach. Ensign Allison did his best and died in the surf. Bobby Watson did his best and survived to tell the story, to marry Marjorie, to raise 3 sons, to carry that mysterious tattoo on his arm as a reminder that he'd been there, in that hell, and had made it out. The last man in hell who wasn't the last man after all, just one of the survivors, one of the ones who did their best and got lucky enough to come home, to spin a girl around on a dance floor, to build a life from the ruins of Omaha Beach, to say, 68 years later, with characteristic honesty and humility, I did my best. That's Bobby Watson. That's Omaha Beach. That's what it looked like when an 18-year-old kid who wanted 3 hot meals became a man who could survive anything and still find joy on the other side. The anchor tattoo on his arm, the girl spinning for 68 years, the 3 sons who exist because he grabbed that rope and held on. The simple truth that doing your best is sometimes enough, even when it doesn't feel like enough, even when you're the one who made it and so many others didn't. I did my best. 4 words that carry the weight of 28 days in hell. 4 words that honor everyone who was there. 4 words that Bobby Watson earned the right to say. And 4 words that matter just as much today as they did on Omaha Beach 80 years ago.